I'm your host, Effie Pilarinu, and today I have the pleasure to have with us Dr. Eelco Fiole. Eelco, welcome.
Thanks, Effie.
So for our listeners who don't know Eelco, Eelco comes from the investment management, asset management industry. He's a partner at Alpha Governance Partners. He's been working with I would say, a governance focus in the broader investment management industry. And the last couple of years, he's also focused in the blockchain industry. And since anybody that knows me knows that I love building bridges between the traditional world where I also come from and the emerging blockchain or disruptive world that in combination with AI will really change everything. Eelco, there's a lot that we need to talk about. Today we'll focus on blockchain, but before we dive in, I want to add that you're teaching ethics both at HEC, Lausanne, right?
Correct.
And University of Neuchâtel. And today we have to celebrate your graduation from, over to you, from where and for what reason?
Yeah, call me a nerd, but I like academia. And so besides lecturing finance ethics, I've just finished myself a master in blockchain technologies at the University of Barcelona, run by the Ziggurat Institute. And my thesis dealt with tokenization governance. So to your point, yes, I've been for many years in the investment space, being a CFO, COO for around 10 years in the investment space. Since 6 years, I'm focused on investment governance, and since 4 years, I'm doing blockchain governance as well, which of course increasingly goes towards tokenization as well. So yes, that keeps me busy, more than enough interesting topics.
Exactly. It keeps you on the tip of your toes as you're looking into, it's not the technology, we're talking about a paradigm shift here, and we'll have the opportunity to talk about it a lot. I want to mention also that you are already involved in several blockchain projects currently, Adonic and Dev Protocol, amongst others. We personally met, and we met earlier, but we also worked together on the board of an early blockchain startup. So I also saw you moderating a CFA panel with Vitalik Buterin and Mona El Isa, just to give our audience the flavor of how you dance between academia and what's going on in the world. Let's dive in this topic of governance on the blockchain. What does it really mean? Are you talking about, is it all about code? What's built in a chain?
Yeah.
What is it? Tell us how we should think about governance in the blockchain world.
Yeah, it's a broad it's a broad question, and there's quite some let's say activity around governance. A lot of it deals with voting mechanisms and so on. Governance is, in my mind, is the transmission mechanism of the interests of various stakeholders. And so, if we look at blockchain, we can ask ourselves, who are the stakeholders and how are the interests of those stakeholders being represented? Blockchain is kind of a general resource, right? A common resource, if you will. It's like the internet. It is a technology which can span the globe, which can, and develop itself in various sectors of society and the economy, and it is not, in that sense, a completely proprietary technology. I mean, we can talk about private and public blockchains, but basically, blockchain is expanding all over the world. So the question of governance is not a regulatory question, even though we may speak about regulations, because it is a part of it. But it is, how do we get these interests of the stakeholders represented in code, yes, but also in non-code arrangements, so on-chain and off-chain. And that is particularly important in the field of tokenization, where we invite the world, especially the retail world, to invest in tokens and tokenized assets. And then the question becomes, how do these investors get represented in this world, and what effect does it have on developers of code?
So governance is first, as you said, it can refer to voting rights, but also to really what are the rights of a token holder. And especially, I'm thinking of the basic examples of tokens that are representing real physical. I don't like to use the word real. Everything is real these days, right? But physical, whether it's real estate or a piece of art or whatever. So explain to us, some examples of what are the governance issues that are not well understood and recognized, in retail or in this hype mode of owning tokens and trading tokens.
Yeah, I've just invited, as you can see, the sun to enlighten my thinking a bit. So hopefully this will be insightful. Effie, to your question, there are two things which immediately jumps to my mind. And the first thing is that if we look at tokenization as an investment process, i.e. the production of tokens and then inviting people to invest in it, and this is a huge promise, right? I mean, we have literally trillions of dollars of illiquid assets that can be made liquid around the world. Then there are, as I said, two things that come to my mind. First of all, in the traditional investment world, the fiduciary duty of the investment manager is a clear concept. And that is the duty that to place the interest of the investor first. And that is visible in regulation, that is visible in contracts between an investment manager and various service providers that provide service to an investment fund that you would buy. And this fiduciary duty is not so clearly defined in the blockchain world. So a tokenizer that creates an investable token can be seen as an investment fund manager, and as a result, morally speaking, carries a fiduciary duty. We can go into a little bit more detail if you like later on. But this fiduciary duty is not recognized in law, and an investor cannot automatically, let's say, fall back on that legal provision. So there are all kinds of questions around it. Are developers aware, or those who make policy decisions in the token, that they carry fiduciary duties? There has been research which shows that on the one hand, these tokenization platforms say that that they're independent of the asset, but at the same time they claim the rights to deny access to this asset. The second point, which is prevalent here, is that the property rights are not clear. And so if you invest in a fund, then you legally own a part of the fund. The fund owns legally a stock that is part of the fund, and the stock has legal claims, voting claims, dividend claims, and so on a company. So the whole chain is legally secure. In tokenization, it is this legal chain is not there. So if a tokenizer tokenizes an asset, let's say real estate or art, these are the well-known examples, but you can also think about other examples. Dev protocol, we tokenize open source projects, for example. Then the the investor may have legal ownership of the tokenized asset, i.e. of the token, but has no legal ownership in the underlying asset, i.e. in the reference asset, in the piece of real estate, the old timer, the whiskey bottle, whatever it is that you tokenize. And so that means that as an investor, how does the protection really work? There is this huge asymmetry between, on the one hand, the highly specialized and knowledgeable and intelligent blockchain developer community, and on the other hand, the retail investor that typically is not much aware, and you got this fiduciary duty which is not codified into law, and you don't have the property rights in the same way legalized in a way like stocks and bonds and other assets. So these are two things which I think in tokenization will increasingly come up. And for the reason that as long as things are going up and everybody's happy, nobody asks questions. But the moment that we will have issues, then the question comes, how do we resolve conflicts? Let me stop there for a moment.
Yes, I mean, you have really identified the core of what is lacking really, and what needs to be done. And of course, then the question is who will take this role to fill in this gap that exists and that we acknowledge today. Will it be these tokenization platforms, or will it be some type of regulation or policies that are above regulation? And I'm not sure if this is something that you allude or touch upon on your thesis, or you have some thoughts to share of what are the options going forward. What do you see?
Yeah. So if I go back to what I've said about how governance is a transmission mechanism of the interest of stakeholders into reality, then we can ask ourselves, what can we learn from governance principles around investments, and also governance principles around common resources? And if we look at the investment side of things, the investment fund setup is a decentralized setup. Service providers work with contracts, there is regulations, and there is also expected behavior. If we look at common resource governance, the governance of the oceans or of the air and so on, there are principles out there which help govern those spaces as well. And so where we sort of define who are the participants, whether participants have a say in things, the compatibility with law, and so on. So if I would project this on the tokenization space, then I think that we're going to see, and we're already seeing it, of course, a combination of factors which provide governance to this space. We know the concept of DAOs, sets of smart contracts which execute rules, which provide sanctions. We have off-chain mechanisms. If you look at Aragon Court or other mechanisms, let's say where actually people do come together and set rules and resolve conflicts. We will see regulation. I mean, regulation is obviously in a very early stage. And we will also see, or we are seeing, people that want to do the right thing. If you are a passionate developer, you will take accountability, you will say, yes, I stand for what I code. And so there is, I would hope that we see a culture where we also honor good behavior in this community, and that will create trust, and that will create adoption by users. This will also, by the way, influence the valuation of tokens, of platforms, and so on. Now,
it's interesting,
given that,
Eelco. Let me interrupt you here, because you've mentioned very important points. And I want to echo what you described. You are describing that we are seeing a fusion between a fiduciary and governance principles coming from the investment world and the principles of how to manage common resources or how to govern open source networks that exist quite a while. And this fusion is very important, because it seems to me that we are going to get a better framework, better principles for all these DAOs. And DAOs, we can have DAOs and decentralization at different granularities, right? It's not, black and white. It's a question of granularity. And I think this is very important, because it will affect how we collaborate and organize. We're moving away from the limited liability corporation towards sort of the ultimate DAO governance, and somewhere in between, we have to develop these better principles that you describe.
Yeah, that is very true. The intent of the DAO, the intent of the code becomes important. The disclosure of that to people becomes important. So even in the absence of regulation, we can still go out to investors and say, you can trust us because this is the way that we operate. We can have our code being assessed and assured. As I say, transparency given. It is now, and it's going to be increasingly an interplay between off-chain and on-chain, and we don't need to wait till legal regulations come in to actually create ecosystems and for tokenization that will project trust and attract investors, even if things do not go well, even if token valuation will go down.
And these are great principles, beyond cryptocurrency trading that everybody's focused on, as an investment, as a store of value, as whatever, but really in thinking the evolution of digital democracy and how we can use these mechanisms that you mentioned, on-chain and off-chain, for digital identity verification of all sorts of items, if you want, in our life, be it certificates of education or other items that are involved in our economy.
Yeah.
Again, this issue of on-chain and off-chain that distinguishes the layer 1 and layer 2 protocols and so on. How do you see this evolving and the governance challenges between on-chain and off-chain, like the governance challenges between the physical assets and the non-physical assets?
Yeah. Well, I think it first starts with the recognition that the idea that code is law and that we can put everything in code is illusionary. And so there's always this combination of on-chain and off-chain. If you look at layer 1, we'll have, you have the foundations which have important roles. You have advocacy roles being played by parts of the community, policy setting, where protocols are going to develop. So in my mind, there is not a huge difference between layer 1, layer 2, or any other developments that we're going to see, because this fundamental idea that we can put everything into on-chain governance or everything in off-chain governance as maybe the traditional system thinks, that is something which in my mind does not hold. And so what we will, I come back to the point, what we're seeing is that, and what we will see increasingly is trust created by transparency. I see a bright future for assurance services, code assurance, and to your point, and it is also badly needed in the quest for democratization of finance, of access for everybody, tradability, and so on. And so the code quality, and mind you, if I say the code quality, I'm not saying that developers should now be super worried, right? I mean, of course, they do the best that they can. I think that we can consider what we've seen with other initiatives in the past, where developers would receive a grace period of a couple of years, where they say, or whatever time period it is, where they say, okay, we'll see how the code works out, and you have no liability or accountability in the period, in that period, but later on you will need to improve on that. So I think we see an evolvement of all kinds of setups in which we have more or less on-chain and off-chain combinations depending on what the situation requires, and also to the extent that it can relate, that the setup can relate to legal frameworks. And in some legal frameworks, some jurisdictions around the world, that works better than for others. In common law systems, it may work better. We've seen the DAO as a legal entity in Wyoming, for example, versus civil law. And we know that in Switzerland we have had an early definition of token classification compared to maybe other jurisdictions. And so these jurisdictions are not all the same. And as a result, we'll see a high variety of on-chain and off-chain combinations to make things work. Yeah.
So on that note, I have to mention the fact that governance, which even in the traditional world is not that highly rated. I mean, the discussions around ESG that, of course, has been trending as a topic and as an investment thesis over the past year and continues to do so. It's really about the E and not the S and the G. And here we are talking about governance in an emerging world that is definitely the cutting edge of technology. But it's a great opportunity to remind ourselves that governance is an extremely important thing. And as you mentioned, people remember it only when things go wrong.
And unfortunately, we open the newspapers and we see governance lapses basically every day, if not every week. Interests not being represented, or not appropriately being represented. Governance is seen as the main mechanism for climate change policy. Governance is key in TCFD and similar considerations in ESG, as you mentioned. Questions of representation have been around in blockchain for a long time as well. So, governance, there's a hierarchy in my mind there, and so governance, good governance, will make certain that the E is being served, that the S is being served, and hopefully blockchain as an underlying technology for that, of E and S being served. In fact, blockchain technology is of course socially desirable. This is something that I think we can easily agree on. And so to make that happen, we need to get the governance right.
And on that note, Eelco, thank you so much for sharing your insights. Please tell our listeners how they can get in touch with you. You are clearly one of the few people that is focused on governance and has this diverse expertise, bridging the old and the new world, and combining ethics that is sort of the killer combination when we're thinking about these cutting edge technologies, blockchain and AI.
Yeah, our website is alpha-gp.com. So alpha-gp.com. And so that will be a good starting point. LinkedIn I am as well, but and otherwise ask Effie. You're connected to everybody, so that would also work.
Thank you so much, Eelco.
Thank you, Effie. It was my pleasure.